Now, ladies and gentlemen, on to part 3 of the podcast, and that's my reading of my number 43 greatest fighter of the last 45 years, and that's the Radar, Wilfred Benítez. According to my dearly departed father, the most naturally gifted Puerto Rican fighter to ever live was Wilfred Benítez. In his prime, Benítez was both one of the greatest defensive fighters and counterpunchers who ever lived. From 1977 to 1982, he fought a who's who of fighters in the 140, 147, and 154-pound divisions, holding world titles in each division at a time when there weren't a proliferation of world titles in each division. By the way, from 1977 to 1982, there were only 2 world champions per division, not the 37 that we have today. Right? It was just the WBA and the WBC. It's just plain criminal that despite his immense talent and ability, that Benítez is only the 43rd best fighter of the last 45 years. And that's because of his proclivity to live a lifestyle that could not be condoned for a world-class athlete or fighter. Going into 1977, the 18-year-old Benítez was the reigning WBA and Ring Magazine super lightweight champion, having defeated Colombian legend Antonio Cervantes 6 months earlier to become the youngest world champion in boxing history at the age of 17. That will never be matched because in the United States, you're not allowed to turn pro in the majority of states that are under the supervision of the ABC rules of boxing, that a fighter must be 18 years old to turn pro. So to be world champion 17 in the United States is not happening. 1977 was a tumultuous year for Benítez. Benítez totally disregarded defending his title, despite having fought 6 times that year, resulting in the WBA stripping him of his 140-pound crown. Benítez struggled in his first fight in 1977, fighting to a 10-round draw with slick boxer Harold Weston. Then Benítez signed to fight the best fighter in the world at that time, Roberto Duran, in a non-title fight to take place November 18th, 1977 at Madison Square Garden. My father was so excited because at the time, Benítez and Duran were his 2 favorite fighters actively fighting, so that he bought tickets to see the fight. I was only 9 and wouldn't have been able to attend the fight because New York State had a law restricting children under the age of 14 from attending fight cards. Unfortunately, this potential legendary matchup between a 26-year-old Prime Duran and a 19-year-old Benítez was canceled when 3 weeks before the fight, Duran pulled out with the flu. Benítez's performance against Duran's replacement was a disaster. The undefeated 21-year-old prospect Bruce Curry, older brother of Donald Curry, not younger brother, older brother of future welterweight legend and Hall of Famer Donald Curry. Bruce Curry was Duran's replacement that night. Back then, WNEW AM radio in New York City would air the monthly Madison Square Garden fight cards. The announcer, John Condon, who was also the president of MSG Boxing at the time, described Benítez's performance in the first 3 rounds as lethargic. He was then dropped 3 times combined in rounds 4 and 5. Referee Arthur McCanty showed incredible restraint in not stopping the fight. When my father came home from the fight, he admitted that Curry was robbed. Watching, first of all, like I said in the article, I heard the fight on the radio, and kudos to John Condon. He gave a very descriptive call of the fight. I could visualize what was going on in the ring while listening to his radio broadcast, which a great radio announcer of sports should do. Bob Murphy was a master at that for years as the Mets radio announcer, and today Howie Rose does the same thing whenever I hear an occasional Met game on the radio. Watching a tape of the fight years later, Benítez didn't win this fight. This was a highway robbery. Bruce Curry dominated this fight, dropped Benítez 3 times, and was robbed. a win that could have really catapulted his career into getting a title shot back then. Instead, he would fight Benitez in an immediate rematch 10 weeks later, and not even 3 months later. But Benitez won by a convincing 10-round decision, and now Benitez would move up to 147 pounds, where he would win 3 fights at 147 before securing a fight with the WBC welterweight champion, Carlos Palomino. The fight took place on January 14, 1979 in Benitez's hometown of San Juan, Puerto Rico. My father and I nervously watched this fight in our living room that Sunday afternoon. Pop felt that if Benitez fought his best, Palomino would have no shot. Benitez was a much quicker and skillful fighter than the hard-hitting champion. Palomino was able to hurt Benitez in the 5th round with 2 great right crosses, but the challenger did in his first fight. But Benitez did like in his first fight with Curry, show incredible intestinal fortitude to survive against the power-punching champion. After Benitez recovered, he proceeded to put on a masterful display of boxing wizardry that had the sold-out Irán Bithorn Stadium fans roaring with complete adulation of their hometown favorite. Benitez looked to have easily won a 15-round decision. He did win, even though Judge Zach Clayton inexplicably scored the fight for Palomino. At the age of 20, Benitez was now a 2-time world champion and in line to defend against the burgeoning Sugar Ray Leonard. After successfully defending his title in a rematch against Weston, Benitez signed to defend against Leonard. The fight would take place on November 30th, 1979 at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. It would also air in prime time on ABC with the legendary Howard Cosell announcing. Howard Cosell loved Sugar Ray Leonard. Oh, the ubiquitous, the tantalizing Sugar Ray Leonard. Sugar Ray, this is his night to shine. This is the night that the boxing world will crown Sugar Ray as the successor to Muhammad Ali as the king of boxing. My father and I couldn't stand Leonard. While we acknowledged that he was a special fighter, we abhorred his arrogance and sense of entitlement. Leading up to the fight, my father heard a rumor that Benitez was dating Leonard's sister. Not only was the rumor true, they would eventually become engaged. Imagine the mixed emotions she felt that night, where her man faced her brother in their most important fight of their respective careers up to that point. That night, much to the chagrin of Pop and I, Leonard put on one of the greatest performances I've ever seen by an elite boxer versus another. Leonard used his superior speed and punching power to land several combinations against the Puerto Rican defensive wizard. Benitez had no answers for the Sugar Man, and knowing he was way behind on the scorecards going into the 15th round, tried for a knockout, but instead took such a ferocious beating that referee Carlos Padilla stopped the fight with only seconds left in the fight. That was the night my father was convinced Leonard was the real deal. It didn't keep us from hating his pompous ass. But Sugar Ray proved that night that he was on his way to becoming one of the all-time greats. And more on that probably a year from now when I talk about Sugar Ray Leonard and his standing in the 45 greatest fighters of all time. After losing his title to Leonard, Benitez immediately moved up to 154 pounds, winning 3 straight fights before accepting a February 23rd, 1981 fight against the WBA 147-pound champion Thomas Hearns at Madison Square Garden. Unfortunately, just like his November 1977 fight with Duran, the fight with Hearns was canceled due to circumstances beyond his control. The promoter of the fight, Harold Smith, had been accused of embezzling $21 million from Wells Fargo Bank, and in turn, the entire show was canceled. Instead, on May 23rd, 1981, Benitez faced 154-pound champion Maurice Hope in an attempt to win his third world title by the insane age of 22. Benitez put on a virtuoso performance. After his spectacular knockout culminating in his third world title, Benitez sought out a fight that was denied to him 4 years earlier versus Duran. Benitez defended his 154-pound crown against Duran on January 30th, 1982 at Caesar's Palace. My father placed a $250 wager with one of his co-workers on Benitez, and that co-worker was a fucking idiot. Pop felt Benitez was too slick for Duran to fight his usual aggressive style. Duran's aggressive style was tailor-made for Benitez's mastery in counterpunching. As we sat at my grandfather's house to watch this fight, Pop kept smacking me on the back of my head after every round. That was his way of saying that he was right. That night, Benitez was radar-like in his avoidance of Duran's offense, as he gracefully moved his body and head out of harm's way while landing beautiful counters with both hands, left hook counters and right cross counters. Benitez won a 15-round decision in what will be the greatest night of his career. 10 months later, he traveled to New Orleans to make his next defense against Hearns, a fight that had been canceled almost 2 years prior. My father was Puerto Rican and very proud of his heritage. His idol was Roberto Clemente, the single greatest baseball player and athlete ever to hail from Puerto Rico. My father loved Benitez, both because of his wizardry inside the ring and because of his Puerto Rican heritage. And we're going to be honest, ladies and gentlemen. The vast majority of fight fans' favorite fighters are guys that share their ethnic heritage. It's been like that since the beginning of boxing and will never change, and I understand it. But my father also loved Hearns, and Hearns had an offensive weaponry, in his opinion, only rivaled by the great Sugar Ray Robinson. My father rooted for Benitez, but he knew deep down inside that despite Benitez's gifts, Hearns' jab and length were insurmountable to overcome. I remember that night vividly because it was my father's favorite fighter at the time, Wilfred Benítez. Hearns was his second favorite fighter versus my favorite fighter at that time, Thomas Hearns. We both knew that Benitez at 5'10" could not compete with the 6'2" Hearns' jab, right cross, and Benitez was not an aggressive fighter like Sugar Ray Leonard was, where he could attack Hearns and make it a firefight. He was going to try to outbox Hearns, and as we saw in Hearns' entire career, no one outboxed the hitman from Detroit, Michigan. My father was correct. Hearns kept Benitez at bay throughout the entire 15 rounds with his jab and length. Although Hearns severely hurt his signature right cross hand in the 8th round, Benitez had no answer for Hearns' machine gun left jab and was soundly defeated by 15-round decision. That December 1982 evening, Hearns once again proved that there wasn't a man alive who could outbox him. Benitez did not have the aggressive style to try and outslug him, similar to what Leonard did versus the Hitman. Although only 24 at the time of his defeat to Hearns, Benitez's skills quickly declined due to personal bad habits. His relationship with Leonard's sister ended because of Wilfred's proclivity for women, cocaine, and alcohol. On July 16, 1983, Benitez fought 160-pound top challenger Mustafa Hamsho, the winner to get a shot at the undisputed middleweight champion of the world, Marvelous Marvin Hagler. A win over Hamsho would all but guarantee a chance for Benitez to become the first 4-division world champion ever. My father and I sat in shock as we watched Benitez lay up against the ropes for the entire 12 rounds, doing absolutely nothing while the Syrian brawler Hamsho bombarded him with body and head shots. Benitez was completely listless in losing that day. We were in denial about just how far Benitez had regressed. We thought it was just a minor blip in his career. In reality, it was the beginning of the end. Exactly a year later, Davey Moore would knock out Benitez in the 2nd round, a fight that also saw Benitez break his ankle when he was knocked down. He should have retired right then and there, but his drug abuse had gotten to the point where he needed to continue fighting in order to support his habit. Benitez continued to fight until finally retiring in 1990 at the age of 32 when he was diagnosed with a degenerative brain condition. Today, at 63 years old, it is a miracle that Benitez is still alive. due to the punishment he accumulated both in the ring and from his abuse of narcotics. That being said, his 6-year run from 1977 to 1982 saw him as one of the greatest ring technicians who ever lived. That 6-year period alone is enough to be the 43rd greatest fighter of the last 45 years.